Picture this. You're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why you didn't become a concert pianist, a professional astronaut chef, or at least someone who remembers to take their laundry out of the washer before it smells like a wet dog. Don't worry. You're in good company. Aristotle, yes. The Aristotle, student of Plato, teacher of Alexander the Great, professional toga wearer, thought about this too. Well, not the laundry part. But he did wonder why humans never quite reach their full potential. Why we're always kind of halfway between brilliance and accidentally eating half a family-sized bag of chips before realizing it's gone. Tonight, we're going to drift into the world of Aristotle. And don't worry, unlike your high school philosophy teacher, I won't give you pop quizzes. This is philosophy designed to put you to sleep. We'll stroll slowly through ancient Athens, hear the clatter of sandals on marble, breathe in the olive oil fumes, and unpack Aristotle's ideas about happiness, virtue, purpose, and the mystery of why some people clap when the airplane lands. As you close your eyes, I'll tell you about a man who believed that life is like a garden. It grows when you nurture it. It dies when you forget to water it. And sometimes it gets eaten by goats. So, snuggle under your blanket. Take a deep breath. Because in the next hour, you and I are going to wander through Aristotle's Garden of Wisdom and probably fall asleep before we reach the tomatoes. Imagine yourself floating gently through time, like a drowsy traveler who accidentally pressed the wrong button on a time machine that looks suspiciously like a very cozy bed. The air grows warmer. The sound of car horns and buzzing phones fades. And suddenly, you hear the soft clip-clop of sandals against marble. You open your eyes slowly, because opening your eyes quickly is never good for falling asleep, and you find yourself in Athens. Not the Athens of loud traffic, modern buses, or souvenir shops selling I Plato mugs. No, this is ancient Athens, around the 4th century BCE. The first thing you notice is the sunlight. It's golden, yes, but not in the harsh way that makes you squint. It's the kind of light that seems to lay down a blanket across everything it touches. Marble columns glow with a soft sheen, not glaring but warm, as if the buildings themselves have decided to take a nap in the Sunday. The Parthenon, perched up on the Acropolis, isn't yet the crumbling ruin you may have seen in pictures. It's still standing proud, looking freshly painted, though maybe a little scuffed. Because, well, ancient construction workers weren't thinking about Instagram when they put it up. Breathe in. The air carries with it the mingled scents of olives, figs, dust, and a faint whiff of sheep. Yes, sheep. They wander almost everywhere. It seems that in Athens, if you turn a corner too quickly, you don't risk bumping into an aggressive driver, but into a woolly animal who looks at you as if to say, "Yes, I belong here. Don't question it." And so you don't, because this is their city too, and besides, they look fluffy enough to double as pillows. The agora, the bustling marketplace of the city, hums with life. But not the kind of hum that keeps you awake at night. It's the murmur of voices rising and falling in conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from a stall where someone has just tried and failed to bargain down the price of honey. There are fruit sellers calling out their wares, men balancing amphorae of wine with surprising grace, women carrying baskets of bread that smell like warmth itself. A philosopher stands near a column, mid-lecture, gesturing with such enthusiasm that his cloak nearly slips off. You don't need to understand the words to feel the rhythm. Argument, counter-argument, conclusion, pause, a lullaby of reason. And if you close your eyes for a moment, the soundscape becomes clearer still. The crunch of sandals on gravel, the low bleating of those sheep again. A distant hammering as some poor craftsman tries to finish repairing a column before the city council notices. The chorus of cicadas in the background, a sound that might be irritating if you were wide awake but feels oddly like white noise now. A steady buzz that blurs the edges of your thoughts. Athens is not a quiet city. But it's not loud in the modern sense either. Its noises don't jar. They wrap around you, like waves, softening the corners of the world. Everything is stone and sunlight, voices and breezes, structured but alive. Even the air itself feels older, wiser, slower. Look around you, and you'll see young men in tunics gathering around teachers, listening, asking questions. They are restless, eager, full of opinions. Some of them will be famous one day, though most will not. For now, they're just trying to impress each other, as young people do in every age, hoping that their question about the meaning of life sounds smarter than their neighbors. You might smile, knowing that thousands of years later, students will still be trying to do the same thing, only in cafeterias with bad coffee instead of sunny courtyards. The city itself is a paradox. It is both grand and intimate, both impressive and ordinary. On one street, the grandeur of marble steps and sculpted statues. On another, the smell of fish from the market. Not unpleasant, but grounding. The Athenians live among gods and goats alike. And somehow, it works. There is philosophy in the temples, but also philosophy in the taverns. There is beauty in the symmetry of columns, but also in the crooked smile of a potter handing over his wares. And here you are, a visitor, moving slowly through this scene. Nobody notices that your clothing doesn't quite match theirs. Nobody minds if you stop to rest against a stone wall, close your eyes, and just listen. In fact, that's what many Athenians do. Listen, think, pause. They aren't in a hurry the way people are today. They are content to stand in the shade of an olive tree, talking for hours about what happiness means, or whether virtue can be taught, or why that one sheep keeps staring at you. Athens was alive with ideas. And yet, in this moment, it feels gentle. The city is a cradle of thought. Yes, but it is also a cradle of calm. The steady rhythm of daily life, the warmth of the stones beneath your feet, the certainty that tomorrow will bring more conversations, more bread, more sheep. It's not the frantic energy of progress, but the slow hum of existence. This is the Athens Aristotle knew. This is where he walked, where he listened, where he thought. And as you wander further into the city, feeling the weight of the air pressing you gently towards sleep, you realize that philosophy isn't just about arguments and books. It's about being here, noticing the texture of the world, letting it seep into your bones until your thoughts slow, your breath deepens, and your eyelids grow heavy. In Athens, even sheep seem philosophical. And perhaps that's the perfect introduction to a city that believed in thinking, but also in living, and in sleeping soundly after a long day of both. Now that you've drifted into Athens, you may find yourself curious. Who is this Aristotle fellow you've heard so much about? You may know the name. It appears in textbooks, in crossword puzzles, sometimes even in the mouths of people at dinner parties who want to sound clever. But behind the name is a story. And tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, let me tell it to you. Aristotle was born in 384 BCE in a place called Stagara, a small town in northern Greece. Imagine it, a quieter place than bustling Athens, with hills, fields, and that ever-present Mediterranean sunlight. His father, Nicomachus, was a physician to the king of Macedon. This meant young Aristotle grew up surrounded by the smell of herbs, the sight of medical instruments, and the constant reminder that human bodies, however noble, could fail in an instant. Perhaps this is why Aristotle would later become so fascinated with the study of life itself, from snails to stars, from logic to laughter. But before he became the towering figure of philosophy, he was just a boy. We don't know if he was particularly good at chores, though one suspects he might have paused in the middle of sweeping to analyze the broom's design. What we do know is that by age 17, he made his way to Athens, the intellectual capital of the world, to study under Plato at the academy. Ah, Plato. Imagine being a student whose teacher is already world famous. It's like learning guitar from Jimi Hendrix, or baking lessons from Mary Berry, only with fewer electric solos and soggier bottoms. Aristotle respected Plato deeply, but he also had the audacity to disagree with him. That's what made Aristotle, well, Aristotle. He admired his teacher, but also thought, maybe reality isn't just floating ideas. Maybe we should actually observe things. And so he began to shape his own path. Aristotle stayed at the academy for about 20 years, which is longer than most people spend watching their favorite TV show. During this time, he absorbed, argued, and refined his thoughts. But when Plato died, Aristotle didn't take over the academy. Perhaps he wasn't the right fit. Or perhaps the sheep had already called dibs. Instead, Aristotle left Athens and wandered. He traveled, studied, and observed the world beyond the marble city. At one point, he became tutor to a boy you may have heard of, Alexander the Great. Yes, the Alexander who later conquered much of the known world. Imagine Aristotle trying to teach teenage Alexander ethics, while Alexander doodled maps of future invasions in the margins of his scrolls. Now, Alexander, remember, the virtuous man seeks the mean between excess and deficiency. Sure, Aristotle, Alexander probably replied. But what if I conquer Persia? To which Aristotle may have sighed, realizing that some students are destined to do their own thing, no matter how many lectures you give them. Eventually, Aristotle returned to Athens, not to rejoin Plato's academy, but to start his own school, the Lyceum. If the academy was like the Ivy League, the Lyceum was like that cool new liberal arts college, where students walked around with notebooks, debating politics while petting stray dogs. Aristotle's students were called peripatetics, a fancy word that basically means walkers, because Aristotle loved to teach while strolling. Picture it, a group of students following him back and forth through shaded colonnades, nodding, scribbling notes, occasionally tripping over a loose stone, all while Aristotle explained the principles of ethics, biology, and metaphysics. Aristotle wasn't just a philosopher in the narrow sense. He wanted to know about everything. He wrote on physics, logic, psychology, biology, politics, poetry, rhetoric, meteorology, you name it. If he were alive today, he'd probably have a YouTube channel with playlists ranging from how to build a just society to why snails are weird. His curiosity was insatiable, his mind restless. But what made Aristotle more than just a collector of knowledge was the way he wove it all together. He believed that everything in nature had a purpose, a telos. An acorn's purpose is to become an oak. A knife's purpose is to cut. A sheep's purpose is apparently to wander into marketplaces and look mildly judgmental. And humans? Our purpose, he argued, was to achieve eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or living well. Not just fleeting happiness, but the deep, fulfilling kind of life that comes from practicing virtue and using reason. Yet, for all his seriousness, it's fun to imagine Aristotle as a person. Perhaps he had favorite foods, maybe figs or honey. Perhaps he had moments of irritation, like when his students kept asking whether the chicken or the egg came first. Spoiler: Aristotle thought the chicken came first. Perhaps he even dozed off during particularly warm afternoons, head nodding as the cicadas sang their relentless song. Toward the end of his life, Aristotle faced political trouble. Athens could be fickle with its philosophers, as Socrates had learned the hard way. After Alexander's death, anti-Macedonian sentiment rose, and Aristotle, with his ties to Macedon, was in danger. Rather than risk becoming the next philosopher condemned by the city, he quietly left Athens, remarking that he didn't want the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy. It was a dry joke, but you can almost hear the weariness in it. He spent his final years in Chalcis, where he died in 322 BCE, at the age of 62. By then, he had written so much, thought so deeply, and taught so widely that his influence would ripple for millennia. Medieval scholars called him simply the philosopher, as if no other name was needed. And so, when you hear Aristotle, think not just of a stern marble bust with a curly beard. Think of a curious boy who loved to ask why, a restless teacher pacing among colonnades, a man who believed that everything had a purpose, including you. He was brilliant, yes, but also human, occasionally stubborn, occasionally sleepy, and always searching. And as you let yourself drift further into rest, you might find comfort in knowing that Aristotle's whole life was dedicated to asking questions we still ask today. What does it mean to live well? How do we reach our potential? How do we balance thought and action, laughter and seriousness, sheep and marble? He may not have had all the answers, but he gave us better ways to ask the questions. And perhaps, in the gentle rhythm of his story, you find your eyelids heavier, your thoughts slower, your breathing deeper. For Aristotle's life, like Athens itself, reminds us that philosophy is not just about staying awake at night worrying. It is also about finding peace, balance, and, when the time is right, the wisdom to close our eyes and rest. Aristotle's story cannot be told without Plato, because wherever Aristotle went in his early years of philosophy, Plato's presence loomed over him like an older sibling who always got the bigger slice of cake. Imagine being in a classroom where the teacher is not just well-liked, but revered as the greatest mind of the age. Plato was that teacher. He had inherited Socrates' mantle after Socrates had been, well, politely, encouraged to drink poison by the Athenian court. In the academy, Plato's voice was the authoritative hum that guided discussions, and his students, including young Aristotle, listened with rapt attention. But the thing about shadows is that if you stand in one long enough, you start to crave a bit of sunlight for yourself. Plato's philosophy, in its simplest bedtime story form, was built on the idea of eternal forms, perfect, unchanging blueprints that exist beyond this messy, imperfect world. If you've ever seen a lopsided chair wobbling on uneven legs and thought, surely there's a better chair somewhere, Plato would nod enthusiastically and say, yes, there is a perfect form of the chair. What you see before you is merely a shabby imitation. Plato thought the real truth, the real beauty, the real goodness was all up there, in the world of forms, shining bright like celestial furniture in a cosmic showroom. Aristotle, however, was not entirely sold on this idea. He looked around and thought, why are we chasing after invisible chairs when we can just study this wobbly one right here? If Plato was the philosopher with his head in the clouds, Aristotle was the one tugging him gently back to earth, saying, "Look, Plato, clouds are lovely, but this goat chewing on my sandal seems worth examining too." This difference in temperament set the stage for one of philosophy's great partnerships and rivalries. Aristotle spent 20 years at Plato's academy, absorbing lessons, debating ideas, and developing his sharp eye for logic and detail. But while he respected Plato deeply, he couldn't quite swallow the idea that ultimate reality lived somewhere else, in a mysterious realm of forms. To Aristotle, reality was here, under the sun, in the marketplace, in the olive groves, in the study of how things actually worked. He believed that if you want to understand the world, you don't look beyond it, you look into it. The two men had different styles as well. Plato loved dialogue. He wrote his philosophy as conversations, often with Socrates asking awkwardly probing questions that made everyone else look like they'd forgotten their homework. Aristotle, by contrast, preferred treatises, detailed analyses that could feel less like banter and more like carefully assembled instruction manuals. Plato made you feel as if you were at a lively dinner party. Aristotle sometimes felt like the one who, after the party, handed you a 200-page pamphlet titled The Physics of Drinking Cups. Both were brilliant, but in different keys. One of the funniest ways this difference shows up is in how they thought about reality. Plato, with his forms, essentially believed that we live in a shadowy copy of something greater. Aristotle countered, "What's so bad about shadows? Let's study them." For him, substance, the actual stuff of the world, was more important than chasing after abstract ideals. You could almost hear the sigh in his voice when he considered how much energy his teacher spent describing invisible realms. If Plato was obsessed with perfection, Aristotle was fascinated by imperfection, by growth, by the way things changed and developed over time. There's a kind of family drama quality to their relationship. Aristotle once famously said that he loved Plato, but he loved truth more. It's the philosophical equivalent of saying, "You're my best friend, but if you keep insisting unicorns exist, I'm going to have to move on." In a way, Aristotle's philosophy grew out of Plato's precisely because he disagreed with him so much. That's how shadows work. You see them clearly only when you step outside of them. And yet, there is something endearing about this intellectual tug-of-war. Picture the academy, a cluster of young men pacing the courtyards, debating whether justice has a form or whether the perfect triangle exists somewhere up in the heavens. Plato gestures toward the sky, and Aristotle points to a snail crawling on the wall, insisting, "This snail is reality too, and it deserves attention." The other students nod, half following the discussion, half thinking about what's for lunch. Plato's influence never left Aristotle, though. Even when Aristotle carved out his own path, Plato was always in the background, like a stern mentor watching from the wings. Aristotle could disagree, but he could never ignore. And that was the annoying thing about Plato's shadow. It was not only vast, but persistent. Even centuries later, when medieval scholars in Europe rediscovered Aristotle, they still talked about him in relation to Plato, like two celestial bookends in the history of thought. But Aristotle's insistence on studying the tangible world, on grounding philosophy in observation, marked a turning point. He showed that philosophy didn't have to be about chasing perfection in a distant realm. It could be about finding meaning in the here and now, in the flawed but fascinating world we inhabit. For those of us lying in bed, staring at ceilings and wondering if we'll ever reach our potential, Aristotle's rebellion against Plato is oddly comforting. We don't need to be perfect forms. We're fine as slightly wobbly, everyday chairs useful, sturdy enough, and real. And so, Plato's shadow, as annoying as it may have felt at times, gave Aristotle something essential, the contrast that made his own light shine brighter. Without that looming figure pointing to heaven, Aristotle might never have pointed to earth. And philosophy, and indeed, the way we think about life, might have remained more cloudy and less grounded. If Plato had his academy, Aristotle had his lyceum. And if the academy was like the old, dignified university with ivy crawling up the walls, the lyceum was like that newer, scrappier campus where everyone wears sandals and half the classes happen outside. Imagine Athens again, buzzing with conversation, but step away from the academy, and you'll find Aristotle's domain, a shady grove dedicated to Apollo Lyceus, god of light, knowledge, and, conveniently, good acoustics for lectures. The Lyceum wasn't Hogwarts, no magical hats, no owls delivering homework, but it had its own enchantments. Instead of spells, there was logic. Instead of potions, there was biology. Instead of Quidditch, there was walking, endless walking. Aristotle believed the best way to teach was on the move, so his students earned the nickname peripatetics, from the Greek word for strolling. Picture it. Aristotle at the front, beard flowing, hands gesturing, sandals kicking up little clouds of dust, with a trail of students behind him, scribbling notes and trying not to trip on the uneven path. It was philosophy as exercise, a gym for the mind and the legs. What made the Lyceum remarkable wasn't just its walking seminars, but its sheer breadth of study. Plato's academy had focused on lofty abstractions, but Aristotle's Lyceum was like a research hub. They studied politics, ethics, zoology, botany, astronomy, literature, anything and everything. If there was a creature crawling, a plant sprouting, a star twinkling, Aristotle wanted to understand it. The Lyceum was a library, a laboratory, and a lecture hall, all at once. And it was practical. Aristotle didn't want philosophy to float away into the heavens. He wanted it anchored to earth. So he and his students collected specimens of plants and animals, observed the stars, compiled histories of political systems. It was the kind of place where you might walk past one student dissecting a fish, while another debated the meaning of justice, and neither would think it strange. In the Lyceum, everything was fair game for knowledge. Aristotle himself was a whirlwind of curiosity. He would write, lecture, pace, observe, then write some more. The volumes attributed to him covered nearly every branch of knowledge known at the time. Imagine a man who, in a single day, might discuss the role of virtue in the good life, the biology of sea urchins, and the mechanics of tragedy and poetry, all before lunch. Students followed him not just because he was brilliant, but because he made the act of learning feel alive, like a grand adventure of discovery. The Lyceum was also deeply communal. Unlike the solitary image we sometimes have of philosophers, Aristotle's teaching was interactive. He asked questions, debated with his students, encouraged them to observe the world and bring their findings back. The school functioned like an extended family, a community bound together by shared curiosity and endless conversation. There was, of course, a seriousness to it all. Aristotle was methodical, precise, determined to map out the patterns of reality. But there was also something dreamlike about the Lyceum. The rustle of leaves overhead, the murmur of voices drifting through shaded colonnades, the rhythm of sandals scuffing against stone. It all had the quality of a waking dream. where knowledge unfolded slowly, patiently, like a story being told under the afternoon sundae. And yet, for all its scholarly grandeur, you can imagine the small human moments too. A student dozing off mid-lecture, lulled by the cicadas. Another sneaking figs from a basket, trying not to be noticed. Aristotle himself, pausing mid-sentence to brush away a bee. The Lyceum wasn't just a temple of knowledge. It was a place of life, with all its ordinary details mixing with the extraordinary pursuit of wisdom. It's easy to romanticize it. And maybe that's part of the dream. But the Lyceum really did lay the groundwork for so much of what we call science and philosophy today. Aristotle's insistence on observation, classification, and logical analysis shaped how future generations would approach the world. He didn't give us spells or flying broomsticks, but he gave us something just as magical. The sense that reality itself, with all its complexity and variety, is worthy of wonder. And perhaps, as you drift closer to sleep, you can imagine yourself walking there too, following the rhythm of Aristotle's voice. The steady crunch of sandals on gravel, the soft hum of students, deep in thought. The Lyceum may be long gone, its buildings crumbled, and its scrolls scattered. But the dream of it lives on in every library, every classroom, every quiet moment when curiosity takes hold. It whispers that knowledge is not only power, but also beauty, and that learning, at its best, can be as soothing as the lullaby of footsteps beneath the trees. If Aristotle had a favorite word, and philosophers often do, it would probably have been eudaimonia. It looks a little intimidating on the page, like something you might mutter in a spell to summon a wise ghost. But in Aristotle's world, it was not magic. It was the heart of life itself. Eudaimonia is usually translated as happiness. But Aristotle would raise an eyebrow at that translation. Happiness, in the way we talk about it today, often sounds like fleeting pleasures. The joy of a perfectly toasted marshmallow, the delight of finding an extra fry at the bottom of the bag, or the brief thrill of discovering you actually remembered your online banking password on the first try. Aristotle would say those moments are lovely, but they are not eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is deeper, sturdier, less like a sugar rush, and more like the steady warmth of a fireplace on a cold night. It's not just a mood. It's a way of living, a life that flourishes because it is lived with purpose, with virtue, with reason guiding your choices. Aristotle wanted us to understand that while we chase after all sorts of goals, wealth, fame, even cheese, what we are really after, underneath it all, is eudaimonia. It is the ultimate end, the goal behind every goal, the reason we want the things we want. To explain it, Aristotle often used the idea of function. Everything in the world, he thought, has a function, a telos. The function of a knife is to cut. The function of a flute is to make music. The function of a sheep is apparently to wander into courtyards and cause philosophers to lose their train of thought. And humans? Our function is reason. Not that we are always reasonable. If you've ever had an argument with yourself about eating one more cookie, you know reason doesn't always win. But it is reason that makes us uniquely human. For Aristotle, to live well, to flourish, is to live according to reason, to make choices guided by wisdom, to cultivate virtues that align with our rational nature. Eudaimonia is not about constant smiles or endless pleasure. Aristotle didn't imagine the flourishing person as someone lying in a hammock forever, being fed grapes by attentive servants. Pleasure is part of a good life, of course, but it is not the whole of it. Flourishing comes from the integration of pleasure, virtue, and purpose. It's about living in such a way that, if your life were a story, you could nod and say, "Yes, that makes sense. That was a good story." This is why Aristotle believed that eudaimonia was achieved over a whole lifetime, not in an afternoon. You don't measure it by how you feel after a particularly good nap, though those certainly help, but by the arc of your life as a whole. Did you cultivate virtues like courage, generosity, and wisdom? Did you build friendships? Contribute to your community? Use your abilities for good? If so, then you lived a eudaimonic life. It is, in a sense, a patient philosophy. In our modern age, we want results quickly. Happiness in a pill, fulfillment in a 3-step program, enlightenment in under 20 minutes if possible. Aristotle was gentler, but also more demanding. He would tell us, slow down. Happiness isn't a product you buy or a mood you stumble into. It is the byproduct of a life lived thoughtfully and well. If you are virtuous, if you practice reason, if you seek the mean between extremes, you will find that flourishing creeps in like dawn, slowly filling the sky with light. What makes Aristotle's idea so soothing, even now, is that it is not about grand achievements. You don't need to conquer the world like his famous student Alexander. You don't need to write volumes of philosophy. You just need to live attentively, making choices that balance your nature and cultivate your soul. In small, steady actions, being kind when it is easier to be cruel, being courageous when fear tempts you to shrink you, build a flourishing life. It's not glamorous, but it is real. And it's available to anyone, whether you are a farmer, a potter, a merchant, or a sleepy listener in bed. Aristotle even thought fortune plays a role. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, life throws storms our way. No one, not even the virtuous, can flourish without at least some basic stability. Health, friends, a safe community. And yet, even in difficulty, the flourishing person can endure, can maintain dignity, because their happiness is not built solely on luck, but on character. So as you rest, consider that what you seek, what we all seek, is not just pleasure or success, but eudaimonia, a gentle, steady flowering of your life into what it was meant to be, like a garden that, with care, yields fruit in its season. Your life, lived well, can be full of meaning. And though Aristotle might not have known about marshmallows, he would say, "It is sweeter than any fleeting delight, because it endures, because it is who you become." And in this moment, as you breathe slowly, your mind softening into drowsiness, you might feel that Aristotle was right. That happiness is not an instant spark, but the quiet glow of a life unfolding with reason, virtue, and a little humor along the way. One of Aristotle's most comforting and practical ideas is the doctrine of the mean, often called the golden mean. The phrase itself sounds rather glamorous, as if Aristotle had invented a luxury credit card. But what he meant was something much humbler. Virtue lies in the middle ground between extremes. Take courage. For example, too little courage, and you're a coward, fleeing at the first sign of trouble, like someone who abandons their cart in the grocery store aisle because they heard the faint rustle of a plastic bag. Too much courage, though, and you're reckless, charging into danger without thought, like someone who says, "I can totally deep fry this turkey indoors." The virtuous path, courage in its proper form, lies between cowardice and recklessness. It is brave but not foolhardy, steady but not paralyzed. Aristotle believed that this pattern applied to all the virtues. Generosity, for instance, lives between stinginess and extravagance. Honesty lies between brutal tactlessness and dishonest flattery. Even humor has its mean. Too little, and you're a bore. Too much, and you're that person who laughs at their own jokes while everyone else stares at the floor. The mean isn't about mediocrity, as if Aristotle wanted us to aim for blandness. It's about balance, about finding the right proportion for each situation. Think of it like tuning an instrument. Too tight, and the string snaps. Too loose, and the sound is flat. Just right, and the music sings. The golden mean is life in tune, where our actions, our feelings, our choices strike the balance that allows harmony. This was Aristotle's answer to the question of how to live virtuously. Virtue isn't about following rigid rules. It's about judgment, about learning through practice, to find the middle path. This is why Aristotle thought virtue could be cultivated, like a habit. You don't become courageous by reading about courage in a scroll. You become courageous by practicing it, again and again, until it becomes part of who you are. The mean is learned, not handed down. The beauty of the golden mean is that it doesn't demand perfection. It accepts that we all wobble, sometimes leaning too far one way or the other. But with attention and practice, we can learn to steady ourselves. And Aristotle, ever the realist, knew that the mean isn't exactly the same for everyone. What is courageous for a soldier on a battlefield isn't the same as what is courageous for a shy person giving their first speech. The principle is universal, but its application is personal. It's a soothing idea, really, especially as you lie in bed, because it suggests that life is not about extremes. You don't need to be a saint, nor a hero, nor a fearless pioneer. You just need to steer toward the middle, to cultivate balance. Too much indulgence, and life becomes chaos. Too much restraint, and life becomes barren. The good life is like a well-mixed recipe. A little of this, a little of that, stirred gently until it tastes right. Of course, the mean can be elusive. Sometimes you only realize where it was after you've toppled off the edge, like realizing you've eaten the whole cake, when perhaps half would have been sufficient. But Aristotle would smile at such human stumbles. Virtue is not about never erring. It is about learning from the errors, adjusting, tuning yourself back to harmony. As with eudaimonia, the golden mean is not a single moment, but a practice, a rhythm. It is the art of walking the line, of steering your ship between the rocks of excess and deficiency. Too much and too little are always calling, but the mean whispers quietly, inviting you to steady your course. And so, as you close your eyes, think of Aristotle's golden mean, not as a pressure to be perfect, but as a comfort. Life is not a test of extremes. It is a balance, a dance, a melody played just right. Even now, your breath rises and falls, in its own mean, not too shallow, not too deep, but steady, balanced, and calm. That is virtue too. The body reminding us of Aristotle's truth, that harmony is found not in extremes, but in the gentle, golden middle. Aristotle loved courage. Not the noisy, showy kind that comes with trumpets and battle cries, but the balanced courage that walks quietly between cowardice and recklessness. And although he explained it in the context of soldiers, spears, and the dangers of real battlefields, the truth is that courage applies just as well to everyday life. And yes, even to people wearing pajamas, brushing their teeth while staring at their own tired reflection in the bathroom mirror. Courage, in Aristotle's sense, is about standing firm in the face of fear. But it isn't about ignoring fear altogether. Fear is natural. It's the body's way of whispering, "Perhaps do not wrestle with the lion today." A coward is someone who hears that whisper and immediately runs so fast that their shoes come off. A reckless person hears it and says, "Lion? Sounds fun," before leaping into the fray with nothing but a spoon. But courage? Courage hears the whisper, feels the fear, and still chooses the right action at the right time. That's what makes courage feel so familiar. Because most of us aren't standing on ancient battlefields. We are in kitchens, classrooms, offices, or tucked beneath blankets late at night. Yet we still know what it feels like to be afraid, to hesitate, to wrestle with choices. Courage in pajamas. Is courage all the same? Only quieter. It might be the courage to open the bills you've been ignoring. The courage to call the doctor when you'd rather pretend nothing's wrong. The courage to finally say no to something that exhausts you. Or yes to something that scares you but also excites you. Aristotle would say that balance matters. Too much timidity, and life shrinks down until it feels like you're living in a shoebox. Too much recklessness, and life unravels into chaos, where every impulse becomes a disaster waiting to happen. The courage that lies in between is steady. It doesn't look heroic from the outside, but it builds a life that can flourish. Imagine someone who stays silent at work, even when they see an injustice. That's cowardice. Aristotle would say, the kind that corrodes dignity. Now imagine someone who shouts about everything, tilting at windmills, exhausting themselves and everyone else. That's recklessness. Courage gone too far. The balanced courage is the person who speaks up when it matters most, who chooses battles wisely, who can face discomfort without letting it overwhelm them. Aristotle liked the idea that virtues are habits. You don't become courageous because you made one brave choice. You become courageous by practicing courage over and over until it becomes part of you. Like brushing your teeth every night, only instead of avoiding cavities, you're avoiding the decay of your character. Courage becomes woven into you, so that when life does throw something enormous your way, you're not paralyzed, nor foolish. You are steady. Think of the silly daily examples. Courage is pressing send on the email you've rewritten 10 times. Courage is wearing pajamas with ducks on them and still answering the door for a package. Courage is admitting that you've eaten the entire tub of ice cream and deciding to forgive yourself instead of spiraling into despair. These things might seem small, but Aristotle's point was that every virtue lives in action, not in abstract ideas. A balanced life isn't built in a single grand moment, but in countless tiny choices. What makes his philosophy so calming is that courage, properly understood, doesn't require heroism. You don't need to slay dragons. You just need to resist the extremes. Don't flee from every discomfort. Don't fling yourself into every danger. Keep to the middle path, the mean, and you'll be living with courage. So, as you lie in bed, perhaps in pajamas that Aristotle would find baffling because, let's be honest, the man probably never imagined flannel with cartoon owls. Consider that even here, you can practice courage. Courage to rest when your mind tells you to keep worrying. Courage to release the day's failures and let sleep come. Courage to know that imperfection is not cowardice, but humanity. And so balance matters. In the daytime, in the nighttime, in pajamas or armor. Too little, and you hide from life. Too much, and you burn out. Just right, and you drift into harmony, steady enough to face the world, calm enough to fall asleep. Aristotle would approve. And the sheep, still wandering the agora, would probably nod too, though perhaps for different reasons. Aristotle had a fondness for acorns, not because he liked to snack on them, but because they helped him explain one of his most beautiful ideas, the concept of potential. To him, an acorn was never just a little nut. It was a promise, a seed of destiny, a tiny package containing the blueprint for an oak tree. You look at an acorn and you don't just see what it is. You see what it could become. That, Aristotle thought, was true of all living things. And it is true of us, too. We are, each of us, like acorns. Not because we're small, brown, and tempting to squirrels, but because inside us lies a potential, a telos, a natural end toward which we grow. For Aristotle, everything in the universe had both actuality, what it is now, and potentiality, what it could be. The acorn is actually an acorn, but potentially an oak. You, lying in bed right now, are actually yourself, but potentially more, potentially wiser, kinder, more fulfilled. This is not about perfection. Aristotle didn't imagine that everyone's telos was to become a world conqueror, like Alexander. Instead, he believed that every being has its natural fulfillment, the flourishing form it is meant to take. An oak tree grows tall and sturdy, not because it envies palm trees, but because that's what it island. A flute's purpose is to make music, not to chop onions. And a human's purpose, guided by reason and virtue, is to grow into a flourishing life, a eudaimonia-shaped existence. Potential is comforting because it means we are not finished yet. You might feel today like a rather unimpressive acorn, rolling around in the dirt, unnoticed. Aristotle would pat your shoulder and say, "That's fine. Oaks do not appear overnight. Growth is slow, steady, sometimes invisible. But it is there. Each choice, each practice of virtue, each moment of courage or kindness is like sunlight and rain, nurturing your acorn self toward oakhood." Of course, Aristotle was realistic. Not every acorn becomes an oak. Some are eaten by pigs, some are crushed under sandals, some never sprout. Likewise, not every human potential is realized. Life can be cruel, circumstances can be harsh. Fortune, that unpredictable goddess, plays her role. But Aristotle's emphasis was still hopeful. Within you lies something waiting to unfold, and your task is to give it the best chance to grow. Think of the little ways this shows up. A child learning to read is like an acorn reaching toward its oak. A musician practicing scales is unfolding their potential. Even you, listening to these words, are nurturing your capacity for reflection, for rest, for balance. In every action, we are moving from potential to actuality, from what could be to what island. It's a poetic vision, but also practical. Aristotle didn't think potential unfolds automatically. You can't just toss an acorn on the table and expect a forest. It needs soil, water, care. Likewise, humans need education, practice, virtue, and community. We need friends to encourage us, teachers to guide us, routines to shape us. Potential is only the starting point. It is what you do with it that matters. But what a soothing thought, especially as you lie down to rest. You don't need to be fully grown tonight. You don't need to have reached your oakhood already. It is enough to know that you are on the path, that within you lies the shape of flourishing, waiting patiently. Sleep itself is part of that growth, like the quiet night that allows the seedling to gather strength. Aristotle's acorn reminds us that becoming ourselves is a journey, actuality, and potential dance together. Each day, you are both who you are and who you are becoming. Each night, you can let go of the pressure to be finished and rest in the knowledge that even acorns take time. So close your eyes. Imagine yourself not as a flawed or incomplete person, but as a small seed with the promise of strength. Your roots will grow, your branches will spread, your leaves will unfurl. In time, you will be an oak, steady, sheltering, flourishing. Tonight, though, you are simply resting in the soil, potential humming softly within you, waiting for the Sunday. Aristotle would smile at that. And the squirrel, if it doesn't eat you, might smile too. One of the hardest but most comforting truths in Aristotle's philosophy is this: you will never be perfect, and before you sigh or clutch your blanket in despair, consider that this was meant as liberation, not condemnation. Perfection, in the sense of some flawless final state, where you never trip, never falter, never send an awkward email, simply does not belong to human beings. And Aristotle, with the kindly firmness of a teacher who has seen many eager students, wanted us to accept this truth and make peace with it. He had spent years studying plants, animals, politics, and people, and he noticed that everything grows, everything changes, everything strives, but nothing ever fully reaches the ideal that might be imagined for it. A tree can be magnificent, yes, but it may have one branch crooked, one leaf eaten by insects. A horse can be swift and strong, but even the finest horse will someday stumble. Humans, too, strive toward their telos, their purpose, but we are always a little short of the finish line. And that is not failure. It is simply the condition of life. Think of how we approach self-improvement today. We promise ourselves that tomorrow we will wake early, eat only healthy foods, write 10 pages of our novel, exercise, meditate, and perhaps even learn Italian before dinner. By noon, of course, we find ourselves still in pajamas, picking crumbs out of the sheets, and scrolling aimlessly through our phones. Aristotle would not scold us. He would simply point out that our potential is not a switch to be flipped, but a horizon always out of reach. We walk toward it, but we never fully arrive. That might sound discouraging, but Aristotle thought it was precisely what made life worth living. If we could achieve perfection, there would be nothing left to do. Imagine being finished complete, flawless, incapable of error. It would be dreadfully boring. The joy of being human is not in being perfect, but in practicing, improving, stumbling, trying again, and in slowly shaping ourselves through habits. Virtue is a craft, not a trophy. And like any craft, it is never done. It is worked on each day, polished, sanded, adjusted. He knew that this truth could sting, though. People like to imagine they can reach some final version of themselves where everything is under control. We buy planners, join gyms, make promises in the glow of New Year's fireworks. And then, inevitably, reality intrudes. Aristotle, watching this endless cycle, even in his own students, gently reminded them that the point was not to become gods. Perfection belongs to the divine, not to mortals. We are human, and humans wobble. What matters is not that you will never reach perfection, but that you keep growing. You may not be the flawless oak tree, but you can still be a sturdy, sheltering one. You may not reach the shining ideal of courage, but you can be more courageous today than you were yesterday. You may never embody wisdom perfectly, but you can learn, reflect, and adjust. That, for Aristotle, was enough. Consider courage again. Even the bravest person sometimes feels fear. Even the most generous person sometimes feels the tug of selfishness. Aristotle would say, that's fine. Virtue is not about erasing flaws. It's about balancing them, practicing them, until, on the whole, your character leans toward the good. Perfection is not the point. Progress Island. It is soothing to think of life this way, especially at night. when the mind often replays every mistake, every word spoken wrong, every task left undone. You lie there, worrying that you are behind, that you should have been more, done more, reached more. Aristotle's voice, carried across centuries, reminds you, of course you haven't reached perfection. You never will. Nobody does. And that is not a failure. It is the essence of being human. It is like music. A perfect, unchanging note would not make a song. It is the movement between notes, the imperfections in rhythm, the pauses and crescendos that make it alive. Life is not a flawless note. It is a melody in progress. So let yourself rest. Let go of the illusion that tomorrow you will suddenly be perfect. Instead, trust that tomorrow you can practice again, and the day after that, you can practice more. Each step brings you closer to your potential, but the horizon will always stretch a little farther. It is not there to be reached. It is there to keep you walking, breathing, living, and in that walking, in that imperfect striving, lies the beauty of being human. You'll never be perfect, but you can be alive, and that is more than enough. If Aristotle were tucking you in for bed, he would almost certainly begin to describe the universe. Not in the dizzying, infinite terms we use today, with galaxies and black holes and billions of stars, but in the soothing, orderly way he imagined it. A cosmos with structure. A cosmos like a lullaby. To him, the universe was not chaos. It was ordered, layered, harmonious. Everything had its place. At the center sat the earth, steady and unmoving. Around it, the heavens turned in perfect circles, carrying the sun, moon, stars, and planets. The sky itself was eternal, made of a special substance he called aether, while everything on earth was made of the familiar four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Now, you may smile at this picture, knowing what science has since revealed. But to Aristotle, this vision was not primitive, it was calming. It told a story in which the universe was comprehensible, a grand cosmic clock whose gears turned with purpose. To live in such a universe was to live in a home, not in a meaningless void. He explained that motion, too, had order. Every element sought its natural place. Earth and water fell downward. Fire and air rose upward, each moving as if longing for its proper home. Drop a stone, and it falls because it is heavy with earth. Light a flame, and it rises, because fire naturally seeks the heavens. Even the stars, in their endless circles, moved not randomly but because they were guided by the divine perfection of the unmoved mover, a prime cause that set everything in motion without itself being moved. This picture of the universe might seem quaint, but it is strangely soothing to imagine. Everything has direction. Everything has purpose. Nothing drifts aimlessly. The cosmos is a symphony, each part playing its note in harmony. Aristotle's order extended to life as well. Plants grow toward the sun. Animals seek nourishment. Humans seek meaning. Each being strives toward its telos, its end. The universe is full of striving, full of order, full of purpose. Even when things seem random to us, storms, illnesses, accidents, they belong to a larger structure that we may not see, but that exists nonetheless. And though later ages would correct and expand upon his astronomy, the lullaby quality of his cosmos remains. Think of it. The heavens turning steadily overhead, the stars circling gently, the earth nestled in the center. There is no rush, no panic, only rhythm. Night follows day. Seasons follow one another. the cycles continue. The order of the universe is like a heartbeat, steady and reassuring. For Aristotle, this order was not just out there in the skies. It was within us too. The human soul, he believed, had its own structure. The vegetative part that handles growth and nutrition. The sensitive part that allows us to perceive and move. And the rational part that seeks truth. Just as the cosmos is ordered, so are we. And when we live in accordance with that order, balancing our parts, guided by reason, we flourish. As you drift toward sleep, imagine the cosmos, the way Aristotle described it. Imagine lying in your bed, as if it were the earth, steady and central, while the heavens turn slowly overhead. The stars, like gentle guardians, circle in silence. The air carries you. The earth supports you. The water in your body flows. The warmth of fire keeps you alive. You belong to this ordered world, not apart from it but woven into it. It is a comforting vision, especially in contrast to the chaos we often feel. The universe may seem random, but in Aristotle's lullaby, it is ordered, harmonious, purposeful. Each thing in its place. Each motion directed. Each soul moving toward its end. And so, as the heavens turn silently in your imagination, let yourself feel the order too. Your breath rises and falls. Your heart beats steadily. The cycles of life continue. You are part of a cosmos that sings softly, endlessly, like a cradle song. Aristotle would smile and tell you to rest, for the universe itself is already in order. If you asked Aristotle what makes life worth living, he would not have said gold, power, or even wisdom itself. He would have said friendship, and not the kind of friendship where someone occasionally likes your social media posts or sends you a birthday message copied from last year's. He meant real friendship. The kind that wraps around your soul the way a warm blanket wraps around your shoulders on a chilly night. For Aristotle, friendship was not a luxury. It was essential. Without friends, he thought, no one would choose to live, even if they had all other goods. You could have riches, health, and even some measure of wisdom. But without someone to share it with, life would be hollow, like bread without yeast, flat and unappealing. Friendship made the good life complete, because flourishing was never meant to be a solo performance. It was a duet, a chorus, a shared melody. He explained that there are different kinds of friendship. Some are based on utility. You're friends because you get something from each other, like the neighbor who lends you a ladder when you need to fix a roof tile. Others are based on pleasure. You enjoy each other's company, laugh together, perhaps share jokes about sheep wandering through the agora. But the highest form of friendship, Aristotle insisted, is the friendship of virtue. This is when two people admire the goodness in each other's character, when they encourage one another to grow, to live well, to reach toward their potential. In such friendships, you don't just like what your friend does for you, or how they make you feel in the moment. You like who they are, and you want what is best for them, not just for yourself. It is a friendship built on mutual recognition of virtue, and it endures because it is rooted in what is lasting. Utility fades when the ladder breaks. Pleasure fades when the jokes run dry. But virtue can remain steady through the seasons of life. Aristotle thought of friendship almost as a mirror. In our friends, we see ourselves reflected, but often more clearly, more generously. A good friend reminds us of who we are at our best, calls us back to virtue when we stumble, and rejoices in our flourishing as though it were their own. To be without such friendship, he thought, was to be deprived of something fundamentally human. Even the wise, even the self-sufficient, still need friends. And friendship, for Aristotle, was not only between individuals, It was also the glue of the city. A community without friendship, without goodwill and shared concern, would be brittle and prone to fracture. Just as a blanket is made of many threads woven together, so society is made of friendships woven across its people. The more genuine those bonds, the warmer and stronger the whole becomes. Consider the comfort of this idea as you lie in bed. Perhaps you remember a friend who made you laugh until your sides hurt, or one who sat quietly with you in grief, or one who reminded you gently not to give up. These moments are not minor. They are the very fabric of the good life. Aristotle would nod, perhaps even smile, knowing that in friendship you have touched the core of what it means to flourish. Friendship is not always easy. Even Aristotle admitted that friends sometimes disagree, sometimes drift apart. But he also believed that the effort of sustaining friendship was worth it, because through it, we practice the virtues of patience, forgiveness, generosity, and love. Friendship is not simply given. It is cultivated, like a fire tended with care, keeping the night warm. And isn't that precisely what friends feel like? A source of warmth, a blanket you can wrap around yourself when life feels cold. Friends share your burdens, amplify your joys, and remind you that you are not alone in this strange, fleeting journey. To Aristotle, that was not just nice, it was necessary. So as you close your eyes, imagine your life as a blanket stitched together by friendships, each one adding a patch of color, a thread of warmth. Some patches are bright and playful, others are sober and steady, but together they form something that shelters you, comforts you, and makes your life whole. Without friends, life is bare. With them, it is rich, flourishing, complete. Aristotle, seated by the fire, would say simply, if you want the good life, seek good friends, and hold them close, as you would a warm blanket on a winter's night. When Aristotle described the best kind of life, he did not point to wealth, or to political power, or even to the bonds of friendship, though he considered those precious. He said the highest life was the life of contemplation, the quiet turning of the mind toward truth, the gentle savoring of thought. It was, in a way, the perfect prelude to sleep, because contemplation slows us down, draws us inward, and lets us dwell in the calm rhythms of understanding. For Aristotle, contemplation was not daydreaming or idle musing. It was the activity of the mind at its most focused, its most serene. Just as a harp sounds its purest note when the string is perfectly tuned, so the mind sounds its clearest music when it contemplates. And because he thought reason was the highest part of our nature, he believed contemplation was the activity most in harmony with who we are. It was our soul doing what it does best. What did Aristotle contemplate? The eternal truths, the nature of the cosmos, the order of being, the principles of life. He wasn't fretting over grocery lists or worrying about whether his sandals matched his tunic. His contemplation rose above the anxieties of daily life and sought the steady, unchanging realities that lie beneath. And in that seeking, he found peace. He even thought that contemplation connected us to the divine. The gods, he believed, lived lives of perfect thought, eternally contemplating. When we contemplate, we share, even briefly, in that divine activity. It is as if, for a moment, our souls rise above the clamor of appetites and fears and touch something timeless. No wonder he thought it was the highest happiness. Now, before you worry that you need to spend your nights reciting metaphysical principles, remember that contemplation for Aristotle was not about stressing yourself with complexity. It was about quiet, about focus, about resting in the truth. Even reflecting on the small wonders around you a bird in flight, a leaf's pattern, the rhythm of your own breath, can be a kind of contemplation. It is the mind dwelling gently, savoring without haste. And isn't that what you are doing now? Listening, letting words drift through your thoughts, allowing them to soften you toward sleep. This too is a form of contemplation, a quiet attention to ideas without the need to grasp or control them. Aristotle's vision of contemplation offers a remedy for our restless age. We rush, we strive, we consume information endlessly. But contemplation invites us to pause, to rest not in distraction, but in stillness. It is the sweetness of sitting beneath a tree, letting the sunlight flicker through leaves. It is the calm of watching stars without counting them. It is the breath before sleep, when the mind ceases its chatter and simply rests in being. He even suggested that the contemplative life was the most self-sufficient. In politics, in wealth, in pleasure, you need others, you need fortune, you need constant activity. But in contemplation, you need very little. You need only yourself, your mind, and perhaps a quiet corner where the cicadas hum. It is, in that sense, the simplest life, stripped of noise, filled with clarity. So, as you lie here, let contemplation prepare you for sleep, not the frantic contemplation of worries, but the calm kind, where thought drifts lightly, like leaves on water. Think of the order of the universe, the steadiness of the stars, the slow growth of the acorn into the oak. Think of Aristotle himself, pacing his Lyceum, then pausing, falling silent, his mind absorbed in quiet wonder. He would say, "This is the highest life, the most divine life, and yet you are already practicing it, here and now, as you listen, as you breathe, as you drift." And soon, contemplation will slip into dreams. The mind, still savoring, will yield to sleep. And that, too, is fitting. For if contemplation is the highest waking life, then sleep is its gentle partner, carrying the mind into silence. So let yourself rest, knowing that in these quiet moments, you are already living Aristotle's highest vision, the contemplative life, preparing you for the sweetest snoring. Aristotle's ethics can sound lofty, wrapped up in Greek words and ancient lectures. But when you look closer, it is astonishingly practical. His vision of virtue ethics is not about memorizing commandments or following rigid lists of do's and don'ts. It's about shaping yourself, little by little, through choices, habits, and the gentle balance of reason. And it applies just as much to your modern life. Even in the quiet moments when you are sprawled on the couch, remote in hand, deciding whether to watch another episode of a show that is objectively mediocre, but somehow comforting. Aristotle would not have known about Netflix. Of course, though one suspects he might have liked the idea of binge-watching tragedies if someone had performed them on repeat in the Athenian theater. What he would have cared about is how your choices, however small, contribute to the person you are becoming. For him, ethics was never about individual acts taken in isolation. It was about character, the sum of habits you cultivate over time. You are not defined by one decision, but by the steady rhythm of choices that shape who you are. Take that question of whether to watch one more episode. On its own, it's neither virtuous nor vicious. But Aristotle would ask, what habit are you cultivating? If you are neglecting responsibilities, ignoring your health, avoiding the real world for endless distraction, then perhaps the balance is off, leaning toward excess. But if the episode is a way to relax after a long day, to share laughter with a friend, to give yourself rest, then it might be part of a flourishing life. Context matters. Judgment matters. Virtue ethics is about finding that mean. Not too much, not too little, but the right balance for the right moment. This way of thinking is both liberating and demanding. It frees you from the anxiety of rigid rules. There is no universal law that says watching television is wrong, but it demands that you think carefully about yourself, your tendencies, your goals. For Aristotle, ethics is less like obeying traffic lights and more like learning to play an instrument. There are no shortcuts, and the point is not to check boxes, but to practice until your actions make harmony. Imagine generosity, one of Aristotle's favorite virtues. It doesn't mean giving away all your possessions and leaving yourself destitute. That would be reckless, the excess. Nor does it mean hoarding your wealth and never helping anyone. That would be deficiency. Generosity is in the middle, giving wisely, according to your means, in ways that truly help. Virtue is not extreme. It is balance. Even your Netflix choice can be thought of this way. Too much indulgence, and you drown in escapism. Too little rest, and you become brittle with exhaustion. Virtue lives in the balance. What's comforting about Aristotle's ethics is that he doesn't demand perfection. Remember, he already told us you'll never be perfect. Virtue ethics allows for missteps. You might stay up too late, regret it in the morning, and realize you leaned too far into excess. But instead of condemnation, Aristotle would simply remind you, learn from it. Next time, adjust. Virtue grows through practice, and practice requires mistakes. Your character is shaped over time, not in a single decision. And he would also emphasize the role of friends. Remember his warm blankets of friendship? In ethics, friends matter too. They help you see yourself more clearly, correct you when you lean too far, encourage you toward balance. Watching a show alone can be fine, but sharing it with a friend, discussing it, laughing together, makes it part of flourishing. Virtue is not solitary. It is woven into community. So, applying virtue ethics to everyday life is not about Aristotle popping up to scold your choices. It's about learning to ask gentle questions. Is this action helping me cultivate balance? Is it steering me toward the person I want to be? Is it nourishing or draining? Too much? Too little? Just right? With those questions, even ordinary acts, what you eat, how you work, how you rest, become part of the grand art of living well. Think about courage. You practice it when you speak up in a meeting, but also when you apologize after losing your temper. Think about temperance. You practice it not only when you avoid indulgence, but also when you allow yourself dessert without guilt. Think about patience. You practice it when you wait in traffic without honking, when you listen fully to a child telling a very, very long story, when you let yourself unwind at the end of the day instead of rushing on to the next task. The point of Aristotle's ethics is that every day gives you opportunities to shape your character. You don't need grand gestures. You don't need to live in an academy or found a school. You need only to practice. Slowly, habits form. Slowly, virtues grow. Slowly, your life becomes more balanced, more flourishing. And yes, sometimes this happens while you are in pajamas, debating whether to start another episode. So do not worry about judgment. Aristotle is not glaring at you from a marble bust while you pick your next show. He is simply reminding you that ethics is woven into the fabric of ordinary life. Your choices matter. Not because anyone is keeping score, but because they shape who you are becoming. And who you are becoming is the real story. It is the story of your flourishing, your eudaimonia. So, tonight, As you let yourself drift, consider that ethics is not a burden placed on you from outside. It is a practice, an art, a gentle tuning. Each act, even the smallest, can be a note in the melody of your character. And if you occasionally hit a wrong note, don't worry. The song continues. Balance returns. Virtue is practiced again tomorrow. In the end, Aristotle's ethics is not about judgment. It is about flourishing. And if a little Netflix helps you along the way, he might not object so long as you still wake rested enough to greet the next day with virtue. Imagine Aristotle with a smartphone. He opens Instagram, tilts his head at the glowing screen, and tries to take a selfie. The angle is wrong, the light too harsh, and the expression on his bearded face is more stern philosopher than influencer. He uploads it anyway, writes a caption about the pursuit of eudaimonia, and waits. Hours pass. 2 likes, both from confused students. Aristotle sighs, sets the phone aside, and returns to observing snails. The truth is, Aristotle would have been terrible at Instagram. Not because he lacked charisma, his mind was dazzling, his teaching legendary, but because his philosophy was not about showing off. He wasn't chasing attention, followers, or validation. He wanted truth. He wanted balance. He wanted to understand why things are the way they are. None of that fits neatly into filtered squares. For Aristotle, the good life was not lived in public applause. It was lived in the steady cultivation of virtue, the quiet practice of habits, the flourishing of the soul. Instagram, with its endless scroll of curated perfection, would have struck him as a dangerous temptation. Too much emphasis on appearance, too little on substance, too much chasing admiration, too little seeking truth. He would have noticed, too, how easy it is to compare. Someone else's vacation, someone else's dinner, someone else's shining smile. Aristotle, who spoke of the golden mean, would remind us, envy is an excess, vanity is an excess, and both pull us away from balance. Virtue lies in appreciating beauty without craving constant validation. Virtue lies in being admired for who you are, not for what you display. That's not to say Aristotle was against community or recognition. He valued friendship. He knew the joy of being praised for good deeds. But for him, the measure of a life was not the number of likes, but the quality of character. You could look impressive online and still be hollow inside. You could be unnoticed by the crowd and still be flourishing in virtue. The soul mattered more than the feed. Think about how he might scroll. A post about someone's new shoes? He'd ask whether the shoes help the person walk virtuously. A video of a daring stunt? He'd wonder if it was courage or recklessness. A long caption about self-discovery. He'd nod, but then ask, what habits are you practicing? What virtues are you cultivating? For Aristotle, appearances were never enough. Action mattered. Reality mattered. Who you were when no one was watching, that was the real test. In this way, Aristotle's bad fit with Instagram becomes a lesson for us. The temptation to perform, to present only the polished surface, is strong. But flourishing is not about what others see. It is about who you are becoming, day by day, in private and in public. Aristotle would encourage us to be less concerned with showing and more concerned with being. Less about the filter, more about the substance. And perhaps, in this reminder, there is comfort. You don't need to look perfect, to broadcast every moment, to win admiration from strangers. You need only to live well, to balance courage and temperance, to cultivate friendships, to practice contemplation. The oak tree does not shout about its growth. It simply grows. The virtuous person does not need to post their goodness. It simply shines in their actions. So yes, Aristotle would be terrible on Instagram. His captions too long, his selfies awkward, his hashtags non-existent. But in life itself, he would flourish, and that is the point. A flourishing life is not about how it looks in squares. It is about how it feels in the soul. As you close your eyes tonight, let that be your comfort. You are not a feed to be curated, not a brand to be marketed. You are a soul, unfolding, practicing, growing. Aristotle would not ask how many followers you have. He would ask how you are living, how you are balancing, how you are flourishing. And that is a far more important story, one you don't need to post, because you are already living it. When most people hear the word politics, their shoulders tense. They imagine endless arguments, red-faced debates, and the kind of late-night news chatter that makes it hard to sleep. But Aristotle, in his steady and thoughtful way, would have shaken his head at that image. For him, politics was not supposed to be about endless quarrels. It was about flourishing, about creating the kind of community where people could live good lives together. And if you approach it that way, politics becomes not a source of insomnia, but something more like a bedtime story, a reminder that we are not alone, that we belong to a greater whole. Aristotle believed that humans are political animals. By this, he did not mean that we are destined to spend our lives yelling in assemblies or scrolling angrily through social media feeds. He meant that we are creatures who naturally live together, who find fulfillment not in isolation but in community. Just as bees form hives and birds form flocks, humans form cities. And the city, he thought, exists not merely for survival, but for the good life. The village may meet basic needs, food, shelter, protection, but the city allows us to reach for higher things: culture, learning, virtue, and justice. In his politics, Aristotle traced this progression. Families come together to form villages. Villages join to form cities. And the city becomes the highest form of association, complete and self-sufficient. Within it, people can live not just safely, but well. To Aristotle, the test of a city was not whether it produced wealth or conquered others, but whether it enabled its citizens to live in accordance with virtue. The city, in other words, was like a giant household designed for flourishing. It's a soothing vision, really. Imagine your own community as a kind of extended family, not perfect, not free of quarrels, but built for mutual care. Aristotle saw politics as an extension of ethics, scaled up. Just as an individual must cultivate virtue to flourish, so too must a city cultivate justice, fairness, and friendship. Politics was ethics with more chairs around the table. He knew, of course, that politics could go wrong. Tyranny, oligarchy, mob rule. He analyzed them all. But even here, his aim was not despair. It was to remind us that politics at its best is not noise, but harmony. A well-ordered city is like an orchestra, each part playing its role, balanced, tuned, contributing to a shared song. That doesn't mean everyone plays the same note. Farmers, artisans, teachers, leaders all have their role, but together they form a whole greater than the sum of its parts. Aristotle thought deeply about citizenship too. To be a citizen was not simply to live in a place or pay taxes. It was to participate, to share in ruling and being ruled. Citizenship was a practice of virtue, a way of shaping oneself by contributing to the common good. Imagine that. Politics not as shouting matches, but as shared practice, like tending a communal garden. He was also clear that the goal of law was not to control people for its own sake. Laws should nurture virtue, guiding people toward balance. A law that doesn't help citizens flourish is like a crooked fence. It may stand, but it doesn't protect what it should. Good politics helps people become better. It makes space for friendship, contemplation, and the simple joys of life. Now, Aristotle did live in a world very different from ours, one where citizenship was limited and many were excluded. We can look back and see the narrowness of his definition, but the heart of his idea remains useful. The city, or society, exists for more than mere survival. It exists so that people can live well together. So, as you lie in bed, you might imagine politics not as a battlefield, but as a shared hearth. Around it, people gather to talk, to decide, to care for one another. There are disagreements, yes, but the aim is not victory over neighbors. The aim is the flourishing of the whole. Aristotle would say that a community without friendship, without shared concern, cannot last. And a community that cultivates virtue, however imperfectly, can warm the lives of its people like a steady fire. This vision softens the harshness of politics. It turns it from a source of division into a reminder of belonging. You are not alone. You live among others, bound together in the fabric of community. And while no city is perfect, the aspiration toward justice and flourishing continues. So perhaps, when the noise of politics makes you restless, remember Aristotle's gentler truth. Politics, at its core, is simply people living together, seeking the good life. It is not about endless debates, but about creating space for virtue, for friendship, for flourishing. And that is not a nightmare, but a lullaby. Aristotle was not just a philosopher in the armchair sense. He was also, in his own way, a scientist, though the word did not exist yet in the way we use it now. He wanted to understand everything, not only ethics and politics, but the natural world. Animals, plants, stars, winds, and yes, even snails. He observed, recorded, and classified with an energy that seems astonishing, especially considering that he did it all without microscopes, telescopes, or even decent sandals for fieldwork. Imagine him walking through the groves around Athens, bending down to watch ants scurrying across the dirt. He might pause to note how they carried crumbs larger than themselves, marveling at their organization. Then he would glance up at the trees, tracing the shapes of leaves, comparing one species to another. By the water, he might scoop up a fish, examining its fins, wondering how it breathed. And yes, if a snail crossed his path, slow and glistening, he would surely squat down to take a closer look, asking himself what sort of soul guided such a creature. Aristotle believed knowledge began with observation. Before you can explain, you must look. Before you can reason, you must see. And so he gathered observations wherever he could, from farmers, fishermen, travelers. He wrote about the habits of bees, the migrations of birds, the anatomy of cuttlefish. His works on biology are among the earliest systematic attempts to classify living things. He didn't always get it right, of course. Sometimes his conclusions were more imaginative than accurate. He thought, for example, that flies had 4 legs, when in fact they have 6. He believed that some animals spontaneously generated from mud. But the point was not perfection. It was the attempt, the conviction, that the world is intelligible. That by looking carefully, by asking questions, we can come to understand it. And his curiosity had no bounds. He studied not only animals but plants, cataloging their parts, their uses, their growth. He considered the elements, the weather, the heavens. He wrote about the causes of earthquakes, the movements of the stars, the nature of time. He was, in short, restless with wonder. What's soothing about this image is that his science was not hurried. It was slow, patient, the science of someone strolling, pausing, noticing. It was not about laboratories or instruments, but about eyes, ears, and a mind attentive to patterns. You can almost hear the cicadas buzzing as he scribbles notes, the breeze rustling the leaves above him, the sheep once again wandering into his field of vision. And there is humor here too. Picture Aristotle trying to catch frogs, or leaning too close to a hive and getting stung. Picture him dictating notes about dolphins, while students try to keep up, their wax tablets filling with messy lines. His science had a touch of the everyday, the clumsy, the human. It was not detached from life, but immersed in it. He saw the natural world as ordered, purposeful. Just as the city had its structure, so too did nature. Each creature had its place, its function, its telos. The acorn seeks to be an oak. The spider spins its web. The swallow flies south. Even the snail, sluggish and unhurried, moves according to its own small purpose. Nothing was meaningless. Everything fit. This vision turns science into a kind of lullaby too. The world is not chaos, but a pattern to be learned. Every creature, every plant, every star participates in that harmony. To watch them is to glimpse the quiet logic of the cosmos. Aristotle's restless eyes sought that logic everywhere, and his notes, however imperfect, were a love letter to the world's diversity. So as you rest, imagine yourself walking with him. The air warm, the ground dusty beneath your feet. Aristotle pauses to point out a bird, a leaf, a shell, and you see it with new eyes. Not as a random detail, but as part of a larger order. The snail glides slowly across the path, and instead of impatience, you feel wonder. Even this tiny creature participates in the mystery of life. Aristotle reminds us that science begins not in laboratories, but in noticing, in attending, in marveling at the ordinary. That slow, attentive gaze is enough to quiet the mind, to turn curiosity into calm. And perhaps, as your eyes grow heavy, you feel like one of his students, listening to his steady voice, lulled not only by knowledge, but by wonder. The world, he assures you, is intelligible. And in that assurance, sleep comes easily. One of Aristotle's favorite tricks for understanding the world was to ask a simple but profound question. Why? Why is this thing here? Why does it look the way it does? Why does it behave as it does? He wasn't content with surface answers. For him, explanation meant peeling back the layers, like slowly lifting blankets on a bed until you reached the sheet underneath. And in doing this, he came up with a framework that has echoed through philosophy ever since. The four causes. The word cause here doesn't mean quite the same thing as we use it today. When we say cause, we often mean one thing hitting another, like a billiard ball, knocking another across the table. Aristotle meant something broader, more like that because of which a thing island. It's the reason something is the way it island. And for him, to really explain something, you needed to look at four different angles, four distinct kinds of answers. Imagine a wooden chair sitting in the corner of your room. You could ask, why is it here? One answer might be that someone put it there. Another might be that wood was shaped into it. Another might be that its purpose is for sitting. And another might be that it was crafted by a carpenter with a certain skill. Each answer is right, but each is different. Aristotle wanted us to see that real understanding means considering all four at once. The first he called the material cause. This is the stuff out of which something is made. The chair's material cause is wood. The statue's material cause is marble. The blanket's material cause might be wool or cotton, or some blend that is mysteriously labeled on the tag. Without the material, the thing wouldn't exist in the first place. It's the raw substance, the foundation. The second is the formal cause. This is the shape, the structure, the blueprint. Wood on its own is just wood, but when arranged in a certain pattern with legs, a seat, a back, it becomes a chair. Marble becomes a statue because it takes the form of a human figure or a god. The formal cause is what organizes the matter, what gives it identity. It's the difference between a pile of bricks and a house. The third is the efficient cause. This is what we usually mean when we think of cause. The agent that brings something into being. The carpenter who built the chair. The sculptor who shaped the marble. The seamstress who sewed the blanket. Efficient cause is about motion, about action, about the process of making. It's the hands, the tools, the energy that sets the material into its form. And finally, the fourth is the final cause. This is the purpose, the telos, the end toward which the thing exists. The chair's final cause is to be sat upon. The statue's final cause is to be admired, or perhaps to honor a god. The blanket's final cause is to keep you warm as you drift into sleep. For Aristotle, nothing is fully explained until you ask what it is for, what goal or function it serves. Put all four together, and you have a complete picture. The chair is wood, material, shaped into a certain form, formal, made by a carpenter, efficient, for the purpose of sitting, final. Leave one out, and the explanation feels incomplete. Imagine describing a chair without mentioning that it is for sitting. You'd miss the whole point. Aristotle applied this framework not only to artifacts but to nature itself. Why does the acorn grow into an oak? Its material cause is the matter inside the seed. Its formal cause is the pattern of oakness encoded within. Its efficient cause might be the sunlight, water, and soil that activate its growth. And its final cause is to become a full-grown oak tree, spreading branches, dropping acorns of its own. This way of thinking may sound quaint, but it's deeply human. Even today, we ask about purpose. Why do we build schools? Why do we tell stories? Why do we seek knowledge? We don't just want to know what something is made of or who built it. We want to know what it's for. Aristotle believed the final cause was often the most important. Without understanding purpose, you're like someone holding a violin and asking, "Why is this wooden box shaped so oddly?" There is something comforting in this vision of causes. It reminds us that the world can be understood from many angles, that explanation is not flat, but layered. Sometimes we get stuck thinking there's only one kind of answer. But Aristotle's causes invite us to look more deeply. What is this made of? What form does it take? Who or what brought it into being? And what is it for? Imagine drifting to sleep with this thought. Everything around you, your bed, your pillow, even the words you're hearing, has its material, its form, its efficient maker, its final purpose. And you yourself do too. You are not just matter. You have form, activity, and a purpose. And while the exact contours of that purpose may unfold slowly, Aristotle assures you, it is there. Causes everywhere, woven into the fabric of life. And as you close your eyes, you might find peace in knowing that behind everything lies not chaos, but explanation, not meaninglessness, but layered reasons. Even the simplest chair, the humblest blanket, the smallest acorn, each holds four causes in harmony. And that, Aristotle would say, is enough to lull even the most restless mind into calm. Centuries have passed since Aristotle walked the colonnades of Athens, sandal dust rising as he lectured and questioned. Empires have risen and fallen, libraries have burned, sciences have grown, and yet his presence lingers. Why? Because Aristotle still matters. His ideas, though ancient, have woven themselves into the fabric of our lives, into science, ethics, politics, and even the way we tell bedtime stories. Start with science. Aristotle was no modern scientist, but his impulse to observe, to classify, to seek patterns, was the seed of the scientific tradition. He insisted that knowledge begins with experience. Look at the world, see it clearly. Notice the details. Don't invent explanations out of thin air. Ground them in what you can observe. That spirit survives today in every laboratory, every field study, every quiet notebook filled with data. Even when his conclusions were wrong, his method curiosity, disciplined by attention, was right. And it shaped the way we approach knowledge. Move to ethics. Aristotle's virtue ethics is as relevant now as it was 2,000 years ago. In a world of conflicting rules and shifting norms, his reminder that ethics is about character, about balance, about cultivating habits that make us flourish, feels timeless. People still ask, "How should I live?" And his answer remains gentle but profound. Practice virtue, seek the mean, aim for flourishing. Not perfection, but balance. Not rigid law, but lived wisdom. Even in the smallest choices, whether to be honest, to be patient, to be kind, his voice guides us. Politics, too, bears his imprint. His belief that humans are political animals, that communities exist for more than survival, continues to resonate. He reminded us that the city, or society, should aim at the good life, not just wealth or power. Even today, when politics often feels like endless noise, Aristotle's vision of politics as shared flourishing invites us to imagine better. And then there are his broader metaphysical ideas. The notion that everything has purpose, that order exists, that causes explain the world. These continue to shape how we think. Even when science discards some of his details, the underlying impulse remains. To find structure, to seek meaning, to ask not just how, but why. But Aristotle matters not only because of what he taught, but because of how he taught. He was a philosopher who lived in the ordinary, who observed the everyday. He studied bees and politics with the same seriousness. He believed philosophy was not escape from the world, but immersion in it. That is why his ideas fit so well into bedtime stories. They remind us that wisdom is not remote, not locked away in towers, but present in the simplest things, in friends, in courage, in balance, in the quiet of contemplation. And perhaps the greatest reason Aristotle still matters is that he understood humans. He knew we stumble, we strive, we long for meaning. He knew we'll never be perfect, but we can grow. He knew we need friends, we need community, we need purpose. He wrote not for gods but for mortals, not for perfection but for flourishing. That makes his voice enduring. So as you rest, think of how his ideas ripple into your life. When you strive for balance, he is there. When you wonder about purpose, he is there. When you cherish friendship, he is there. His words may be ancient, but they whisper across time, steady and gentle, guiding us toward lives that are more thoughtful, more humane, more flourishing. Aristotle still matters because the questions he asked are still our questions. And though centuries of thinkers have offered new answers, his remain luminous, steady, like stars that continue to shine, even as the world changes around them. His philosophy is not only something to study, it is something to live, and, at night, something to rest upon, like a pillow filled with old but enduring wisdom. So let yourself drift, knowing that Aristotle's ideas have survived because they still speak. They tell you, balance matters, friends matter, wonder matters, you matter. And that is why, even in a bedtime story, his voice continues to echo, lulling you into peace. When the dust of Aristotle's words settles, when the scrolls are rolled up and the voices of students grow quiet in the colonnade, what remains is a whisper. Not the booming authority of a tyrant, not the grand proclamation of a god, but a human whisper, warm and steady. It says, live well, flourish, practice balance, seek virtue. Remember that perfection is not your destiny, but growth. Island. That whisper is Aristotle's philosophy distilled, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear it brushing against your thoughts as you drift into rest. At the center of it all is eudaimonia, flourishing, the good life. Happiness, but not the kind you can buy on sale or package neatly in an afternoon. It is the steady unfolding of your life in harmony with reason, with virtue, with what you are meant to be. Like a plant leaning toward the sun, your soul leans toward flourishing. It is not a sprint, not a finish line, but a way of moving, a melody played across years. And how do you reach for it? Through virtue, not rigid rules, not commandments etched in stone, but habits, cultivated like seeds in soil. Courage, generosity, temperance, patience, all practiced daily, gently, until they grow into the fabric of your character. You wobble, you stumble, but you learn, you return, you adjust. Virtue is not perfection. It is practice. The golden mean guides you here. Not too much, not too little, but balance. Between cowardice and recklessness lies courage. Between stinginess and extravagance lies generosity. Between silence and chatter lies honest speech. Virtue is not about extremes, but about harmony, the quiet music of a life tuned just right. Aristotle's whisper also reminds you of friendship. Friends are not accessories to a good life. They are its core. A life without friends, he said, no one would choose, even with all other goods. In friends, you find warmth, mirrors for your soul, companions for the journey. In them, you practice virtue. You share joys and burdens. You remember you are not alone. Friendship is the blanket that covers the coldness of existence. Soft, steady, indispensable. He whispers, too, of contemplation. Beyond action, beyond politics, beyond even friendship, there is the quiet life of thought, where the mind rests in truth, where the soul touches the eternal. This is the highest life, he said, the most divine, because it aligns with the best part of our nature. And even if you are not in a lyceum colonnade but in a bed, eyes heavy with sleep, you practice a form of it now. Listening, reflecting, letting ideas drift through you gently. That is contemplation too. Aristotle also whispers of order. The universe, he believed, is not chaos but cosmos, structured, purposeful. Causes explain things, purposes direct them. Everything strives toward its end. The acorn becomes the oak. The fire rises. The stars circle. And you, too, have purpose. You may not see it clearly yet, but it unfolds in you like a seed. Trust that your life is not random, but directed, meaningful, in ways that may be hidden, but are real. And in all this, he reminds you, you will never be perfect. Do not fret. That is the burden of gods, not mortals. You are human, and to be human is to strive, to stumble, to practice again. Do not measure yourself by unreachable ideals. Measure yourself by growth, by balance, by the quiet flourishing of your soul across time. This is Aristotle's whisper of wisdom. It is not loud. It does not command. It invites. It nudges. It soothes. It tells you that philosophy is not distant, not abstract, but close, woven into your daily life, in friendships, in choices, in laughter, in rest. It tells you that you matter, that your life can flourish, that even now, as your eyes close, you are practicing the art of being human. And perhaps that whisper is all you need tonight. No heavy treatises, no debates, no clattering arguments, just a voice that says, balance matters, friends matter, wonder matters, you matter. Let those words settle softly, like a blanket drawn up under your chin, warm, steady, reassuring. Aristotle's wisdom is not a storm, but a lullaby, carrying you gently into sleep. The time has come to say goodnight, not only to you, who listens, but to Aristotle himself. Picture him now, the philosopher of balance and flourishing, seated in his lyceum as twilight deepens. The colonnades cast long shadows. The cicadas quiet down. The city hum fades into silence. He gathers his scrolls, brushes dust from his cloak, and leans back with the kind of tiredness that feels honest, earned. He has thought much, taught much, and walked many miles today. Even Aristotle, lover of contemplation, must eventually rest. As you picture him, you might also picture yourself. Like Aristotle, you are not finished. Your potential hums within you, like the promise of an oak within an acorn. You will stumble. You will strive. You will never be perfect. But that is not a flaw. It is the beauty of being human. Rest is not failure. It is part of growth. The oak grows in the dark as well as in the light. You, too, grow in sleep as well as in action. So let Aristotle's lessons close around you like the softest blanket. Remember his insistence on friendship, that no life is good without it. Remember his faith in virtue, practiced daily, quietly, like brushing your teeth or watering a plant. Remember his vision of balance, the golden mean, the harmony between too much and too little. Remember his love of contemplation, the quiet joy of thought, which you now practice in this very act of listening. But most of all, remember his gentleness. Though often portrayed as stern, his philosophy carries kindness. It tells you not to punish yourself for imperfection, but to keep practicing. It tells you not to chase extremes, but to walk the middle path. It tells you that even the smallest choices, an act of patience, a gesture of courage, a moment of honesty, shape your character. It tells you that flourishing is possible, not someday in perfection, but today, in practice. Now, imagine Aristotle himself saying goodnight. He would not tuck you in, though perhaps he'd hand you a woolen blanket, with a practical remark about its material cause. But he would tell you to rest, to trust that your striving is enough, that your imperfections are human, that tomorrow brings new opportunities for balance. He would remind you that the universe has its order, that your soul has its purpose, and that sleep is one of the ways you move gently toward it. Good night, Aristotle. Good night, philosopher of balance and flourishing. Good night to the bees you studied, the friends you cherished, the students who followed you. Good night to your words, still alive centuries later, whispering in the ears of those who seek comfort. And good night to you, listening now. Let the day's burdens slip away. Let your thoughts soften. Let sleep, that quiet friend, wrap around you. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to prove anything tonight. You need only to rest, to breathe, to be. That is enough. Tomorrow, you can practice again. Tonight, you can rest. As you drift deeper into rest, may your dreams be calm, your body restored, and your mind at peace. Sleep well. You've earned it. And if, by chance, you're still awake and your eyes are wandering, you can gently click on one of the 2 videos on your screen to continue your journey. Each one will carry you further into calm reflection. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. It's the simplest way to keep these soothing stories close at hand whenever you need them. For now, though, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let sleep find you. Good night.